And now, Marvel Studios' Eternals, in which we discover the answer to one of the great pressing questions of our age. Can the thus far invincible winning combination of the most precision-engineered mainstream entertainment assembly line ever created, one of the greatest caches of intellectual property of the late 20th century, a studio head actually capable of balancing the creative ambitions of emergent dynamic filmmaking talent with the demands of an evolving global mass-market audience, and yes, also just a ton of money to spend, but that's also being dispersed from a machine that is both made of and expects to eat more of that same money, still continue its unprecedented winning streak of always delivering the hat trick of succeeding with audiences, succeeding with critics, and raking in a fortune at the box office, even when that formula is applied to one of OG Marvel creator Jack Kirby's least popular, most difficult to follow, shortest-lived creations, a late 70s slice of esoteric ancient aliens head-scratchery that basically no one would be likely to remember existed in 2021, if not for half a century of subsequent Marvel writers pillaging its remains and turning it into the retroactive backstory of, well, everything else that Marvel has now made somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 other billion-dollar grossing interconnected movies and TV shows out of, so now this gets one too. And also, a couple years ago, they asked Chloe Zhao to direct the Black Widow movie, and she said, no thanks. Oh, but I've got a great idea for the Eternals if you were going to do a movie of that, and, you know, what kind of disastrously mismanaged studio operation has a red-hot awards-darling young woman filmmaker walk into their office pitching a big-budget Jack Kirby Space Gods movie and doesn't follow through on it 100%? Oh, but anyway, the answer, kind of got sidetracked there, turns out to be no, by the way, as of this posting, and the surprise twist turns out to be that Eternals has proved to be more divisive among critics than among general audiences, though most general audiences have yet to weigh in. Ironically, while I think it's fair to say there's more than a little truth to the idea that a certain percentage of the mainstream press has been waiting for a vulnerable spot to open up for them to vent their frustrations with the occasionally off-putting omnipresence of the Marvel Cinematic Universe in the film discourse, I think it's much more fair to consider, especially given the way the review aggregates like Rotten Tomato tend to flatten out opinions into a crass yay or nay binary, that the divided response among professionals speaks more positively of certain works than a series of unqualified raves often do. That modern blockbusters often get passing grades and percentages while still being derided as overly safe and formulaic in the consensus later says a lot about just how safe and formulaic so many of even the most well-made ones really are. And while my take on Eternals airs more to the positive side than a few of my respected colleagues, I'm gonna end up going with an 8 out of 10 and a definite recommendation for the big screen if you feel safe about that in your area and circumstances. For those of you who are wondering at what point you could peace out and avoid any mild or unintended spoilers. The fact is, movies that take creative risks, make big swings, do things that are different, and don't necessarily try to be all things to all people by definition are not going to work from every subjective point of view just as often as they're not going to work, period, from every objective sense. Because, hey, sometimes a big risk doesn't actually pay off all the way. Where my opinion may differ from yours or others, on a case-by-case basis of course, is that even when something doesn't work for me, if it's still interesting, I often land on the people should see this side in some respect. I hated Joker, but it's inarguably an interesting artifact. I'm pretty mixed on Dune, but I respect what Villeneuve is trying to do with it, and I'm glad people are giving it a chance because it's not a safe cookie-cutter blockbuster at least. And incidentally, this whole Eternals versus Dune meme is one of the dumbest fake culture war things the internet has managed to invent for itself this year. I mean, these are two hugely ambitious, interesting works of big-scale art from two of our most interesting modern filmmakers playing side by side in many theaters mere months after we almost lost theaters altogether. And we should feel lucky that both of them exist. Stop making up stupid reasons to fight about nothing on social media. Anyway, based on, conservatively speaking, like 30 to 40 years worth of reboots and retcons of a short-lived series of late 70s Marvel comics where Jack Kirby was burning off the ideas he didn't get to use after DC didn't let him finish the New Gods books a few years prior, Eternals is more or less another blockbuster-scale repaint of the Ancient Aliens Chariots of the Gods scenario, but this time with a heavier unspoken lean to the Book of Enoch and Blake on Alighieri plus some Gnostic pantheism to flavor the franchise-obligated Marvel superhero gloss, and an attempt to find a way to make the whole Ancient Aliens things just a little bit less racist. The Eternals of the title, at least so far as we or they are first aware, are evidently a race of extremely handsome aliens gifted with immortal, indestructible bodies shaped like human adults, except for the one who looks like a permanent teenager for some reason, but apparently the emotional development of babies! They're babies! Dispatched to the prehistoric Earth at the dawn of human civilization in order to protect early humanity from a race of alien monsters called the Deviants using their superhuman strength and individual powers under the vague guidance of the Celestials, gigantic, like bigger than the sky gigantic cosmic gods who manage life, the universe, and everything in Marvel outer space, apparently. So, like, capital G gods this time, as opposed to the Thor movies. These appear to be the real deal, so I guess that makes the Eternals angels, which, okay, that definitely tracks. In any case, the Deviants look like various monsters familiar from mythology. Some of the Eternals have names like Thena, Icarus, and Gilgamesh, so you get the idea there. It's apparently going to take several thousand years of human history to kill all of these things, during which time the Eternals are supposed to take a Star Trek Prime Directive, don't interfere, and if you do, try to be coy about it approach to nudging mankind along. Fast forward 7,000 years to the present, with the Deviant problem apparently long ago cleared up, and the Eternals have mostly gone their separate ways while waiting around on Earth for the Celestials to come pick them up. Until suddenly a new, more dangerous breed of Deviant appears seemingly out of nowhere, but possibly related to that whole evil glove that killed and then unkilled half the universe thing, which it turns out did fall under the Eternals' do not interfere, hands-off policy, so it's time to get the band back together, except, well, you know how everyone was joking about the can't interfere plot point not making sense based on the trailers? Well, in truly stunning example of something mysterious about a movie becoming clear when you watch the movie, it turns out the Eternals actually argued about that amongst themselves quite a lot, and that's why they aren't all together anymore. Gemma Chan's matter-rearranging alchemist Circe is dating Kit Harington's handsome history professor in London, her ex-lover Icarus has been drifting around like a dour Superman, Kumail Nanjiani's Kingo has remade himself as a movie star in India, Battlefield couple Gilgamesh and Circe are off the grid because she's developed a mental condition involving apocalyptic visions, and others are elsewhere. But as the search turns up more bad news, revelations about the true nature of their origins, their powers, the Celestials, and how the cosmic machinery of the Marvel Universe really operates, and why and how they fit into it, the Eternals have to face tough questions about the nature of their own existence and tougher choices about what they can or even should do to protect themselves, each other, and the world around them, and also what to do about this whole deviant thing, and what's actually going on there. And yeah, that's basically our angle here. Immortal weirdos hashing out philosophy amidst an existential crisis during a slow-burn apocalypse road trip, or in cinephile reference terms, two Wim Wenders movies smashed together and dressed up like a Terrence Malick movie, intermittently busting out some superhero beatdown business where the biggest surprise of all might actually be that for all the downplaying of Eternals as an action film in favor of its cinematic mood piece value, which definitely exists, it turns out Chloe Zhao can put together some seriously crunchy, satisfying knockaround battle scenes, particularly in terms of how the sound design and location shooting add weight and texture to the oomph when big guns like Don Lee are pounding the crap out of the generally nifty-looking deviants. But yes, to make no mistake, they didn't lie. This is fundamentally a movie about characters who are themselves more heightened metaphors for aspects of the human condition than they are fully human themselves, clearly by intent confronting big existential questions about the nature of life, morality, choice, good and evil, causality, philosophy, and also huge, complex science fiction what-ifs massively beyond the scope of anything even the other Marvel movies have ever committed to before. Like, I didn't think they'd go all the way, and I won't spoil, but yeah, this is where we find out what in the beginning means for the origins of, well, everything in terms of all these other movies, and it's a weird one. Can't wait to see what happens when all the other characters have someone explain it to them. And it's also the first Marvel film in forever you could definitely call more of a talker, where until the big finale, the most important and dramatic parts of this are mostly conveyed by having the characters talk these things out with one another, not necessarily in a series of dinner parties, though there's a couple of those, but one can in fact see why it was so important that so much of this gets shot on location with physical places and real lighting and atmosphere. So many of the most important dramatic scenes involve the build-up and exchange of emotionally charged dialogue between characters, and you want it to be infused with the energy of a real place and time. Audiences expecting epic battles and larger-than-life spectacle will definitely get it, and to be rewarded with one of the most gigantic in terms of both scale and sheer concept finales I think any Marvel movie has attempted. I'd say good luck trying to top this anytime soon, rest of Hollywood, but then I just remembered Roland Emmerich is going to drop the moon on us in February. Can't wait for that one. But this is very much a movie that's aiming to have scenes where characters break one another's hearts by turning away, or do the opposite by reappearing, be the more devastating and consequential, then you'll see. Whether or not it succeeds every time doing that is another story. Eternals is a huge movie with a huge cast, taking huge swings at huge ideas every time someone gets up to bat, and it gets a clear hit most of the time, I think. I wouldn't say it misses any of the pitches, but I don't necessarily think all of them get over the wall either, but more than enough of them do, and it's the important ones. The cast top to bottom is fantastic. I wish a few had more screen time. By plot necessity, the majority of our main storyline is spent with Circe, Sprite, Akara, Kingo, and others splitting time between later scenes and a greater presence in flashbacks, but when everyone is working off one another's energy, it's a wonderfully balanced group, and despite the mix of familiar and less so faces, even megastars like Angelina Jolie eventually slip into being simply their characters. The subtle visualizations for their different traits and abilities are uniquely visualized, which can't be easy given how often we've seen superhuman, magical, this and that powers on screen at this point, especially in the Marvel films, and there's a matter-of-factness pervading it all that's very refreshing, particularly in regard to how ordinary the film regards the anything but ordinary, especially in the too safe, too often, for too long MCU cycle, diversity of characters and personalities that comprise the Eternals themselves. aliens. Why would the Celestials prime up their planet-managing Burger King Kids Club with a sign language speaker? Why would any of the Eternals be gay, bisexual, or have sexuality at all? Well, it doesn't seem to be an issue for anyone in the movie, so why would it be for anyone watching, seems to be the idea. That having been said, when it comes to other areas, particularly in the nuts and bolts of its humanity, worth it or not arc of the philosophical bent, it does feel like there's a few weights left off the bar to get the lift looking more impressive. Not necessarily in a damning way by any means. I mean, it does behoove one to remember that there's a gigantic audience that watches Disney and Marvel movies, especially on the younger side, who will be encountering a lot of the bigger metaphysical and existential concepts being raised as plot points by Eternals for the very first time and be utterly blown away by them, and it's hard to argue against that as a positive in and of itself. On the other hand, it's not wrong to wish that there was a little bit more actual meat to the deeper questions here once they're done asking them, not only because it would help justify what one imagines some will find the most insurmountable ask the film makes of its audience in terms of holding back on a full explanations of why the Eternals all act like they do until we get to the mid-film, oh, so here's what's really going on, mega spoiler info dump, but because it would make the film's philosophical and pseudoscientific implications at least as much discussed in the coming weeks as the post-credits appearances of some very complicated new characters and one very complicated, you'll find out, will inevitably be. Even still, while not perhaps in exactly the shape or form some have imagined, Eternals really does turn out to be the big, bold, bizarre, hard to believe a major studio ever signed off on this blockbuster that people said Marvel didn't have in them. Whether the world is going to reward them for it or not is yet to be seen, but I'm calling this one an 8 out of 10 and recommending that you find out for yourself. Check it out.